I was lucky. I was affiliated with the French Institute in Damascus, and I had excellent professors there, all Syrians who were multilingual and were very conversant with the modern history of Syria. And they suggested that I look at this period and that I rely primarily on mass media. And there were a host of state publications established upon independence. The Defense Ministry had several journals it published. The Interior Ministry, the Security Police published their own glossy popular culture journal. And this is an image that was on the back cover of a journal published by the Ministry of Defense, a journal called Al-Jundi, the Soldier. It purports to depict a military exercise. People falling on the ground, people running, pointing their guns, and one guy pointing to the front to tell his comrades in which direction to go. It's very eye-catching. It's very arresting. And says something about the story told in the book, because you have this title, Democratic Years, and then you have soldiers who are going to overthrow the democratic government. As I researched it, I began to realize that it was this unique little window into political processes in Syria, that they achieved real independence in 1946. They established a parliamentary system. They had a series of elections, and then the Arab-Israeli war began. The government was undermined. The entire traditional political class was undermined. So then you had a series of military dictators for several years, and there really emerged a consensus that they wanted to try democratic governance again. And I mean this among the traditional political elite, among the army, among intellectuals, and so on. So they established this regime, and the army pledged to stay out of politics, and it did not. And so ultimately the army undermines this government again, but you have this 4-year period in which there still is, by Syrian standards, extraordinary freedom of the press, of association, of speech, etc. Syria had independent institutions that were not dependent upon the armed forces. They had government institutions and they had civil society. And if those had resisted the armed forces' call to destroy its opponents and to undermine the democratic system, it might have been a very different story indeed. When the uprising first began in Syria in 2011, when the mass protests first began, I thought that the people of Syria had still learned the lesson of the past, the lesson the regime wanted them to learn, which was, we will kill however many is necessary to stay in power. And they surprised me, so I try not to predict the future anymore when it comes to Syria. Whatever form of government emerges from this horror that we're witnessing now, it must have true separation of powers, and the armed forces cannot, and the security services, cannot be permitted a role in politics.